G'day and welcome back to a World of Warcraft video, and in this video we're going to be taking a look at World of Warcraft Classic, and we're going to specifically be talking about leveling in World of Warcraft Classic, and specifically for the Alliance faction. So this is going to be a leveling guide for level 1 to 60 for the Alliance, and let's begin. So now let's talk firstly a little bit about a couple things beforehand. So firstly, there are three major methods to leveling. Questing, which is the most basic method. This requires you to basically move through the zones and quest through them. Questing is by far and away the most basic method, but it is also pretty much the most simple and straightforward one. Dungeons are something that is an alternative. For example, you could enter a dungeon and grind mobs very easily if you have a dedicated party of 5 players. These will give you a huge boost in experience. However, the big problem with dungeons is getting that group of 5 people that will stick with you to grind out dungeons. And then we have grinding, which is just killing mobs in the open world. Realistically, you can combine all of these methods if you want to, but generally speaking, for most players, questing is going to be the #1 method, just due to its ease and due to the fact that it's accessible relatively easily for solo players. There are a couple things to know about questing that are important. So firstly, we have combat portion of questing. This is where you're going to integrate new skills and spells. We're going to be killing enemies, and you're going to want to maximize your offensive capabilities. You then have recovery times. You're not going to be able to kill enemies as quickly as retail World of Warcraft. A lot of the times, especially as a solo player, you're going to find that in between mob packs, you need to do recovery. This is where things like food, but also things like being able to do basic cooking and being able to cook basic foodstuffs is going to help you out a ton, as it will allow you to shorten that recovery time. And of course, first aid is also helpful due to the fact that it will enable you to be able to have bandages. And then finally, we talk about traveling. Most of the time, the original variation of Classic basically had you explore the World of Warcraft to find all of the different quests. The big thing now is that there are tons of add-ons that give you a ton of great EXP guides. So they give you routes, they give you the power to, like find the best questing routes. So obviously you don't have to use them. I would suggest for players who are scared of Classic, who've never played Classic before, who are very retail centric, to consider using these add-ons, and the one I suggest is going to be Questy. That's really about it. It just helps you with keeping track of things and finding what you need to do. But yeah, so now let's talk about the actual questing route. So on the screen right now, just make sure that everything looks as good as possible. You should be able to see the recommended zones broken down between Eastern Kingdoms and Kalimdor for the Alliance. So I've broken them down to kind of give you guys obviously the best indication of where to go. Generally speaking, you can go through this order and you should be fine, and I think you'll be pretty good to go. You don't have to constantly change. Some of these zones will move a little bit more in terms of level and a little bit less. It's just going to depend on how you're feeling in a given zone. But generally speaking, if you follow this path, you'll be good to go, which I think is going to be really great. We're going to be breaking down the zones from level 1 to 10, and basically breaking down the zones via level. So I'll start with level 1 to 10, then do 10 to 20, etc., and we'll push through until we get to 60. I'll mention each zone, basically a couple things, and also the notable quests there. but that's relatively about it, and whether you need to be concerned about anything in particular. For most Alliance players, Elwyn Forest will be where you begin your journey. The big thing with like Elwyn Forest is that it is obviously mainly for humans, but it is a great starting zone, and this will be where you hit level 1 to 10. You have the Wanted Hogger quest being the main one that's going to be big for you, and this one gives you a green item, which is going to be pretty big. Then, of course, for dwarven characters, you have Don Moreau, which is obviously something that I think a lot of players are obviously going to be privy to. So for Don Moreau, you have their level 1 to 10 for dwarf and gnome characters. Here, notable quests are protecting the herd, which you'll be able to find, generally speaking, over here. And then you also have a pilot's revenge. Pretty much there is Nomagon as well, which you can find on the left hand side of the region, but obviously just a heads up, as it's mainly level 26 to 36, so it's not something you're going to be needing at this level. Then we have Teldrassil. So Teldrassil obviously is on the Kalimdor side of things. Teldrassil is the starting zone for the Night Elf characters, and this one has the Ursol the Mauler quest, the Druid of the Claw quest, and also has the Relics of Awakening quests. So these are going to be pretty straightforward quests that you may want to consider, but generally speaking, it's going to be pretty straightforward as well. So yeah, pretty relatively simple. That covers all of the starting zones, and for the starting zones, really you don't have to worry about too much. They are probably the most simple areas. The level 1 to 10 experience is pretty direct and pretty straightforward, without there being too much alternative routing or convolutedness. So let's talk about the recommended leveling zones for Alliance for 10 to 20. So generally Westfall is the most optimal. Darkshore is not too bad. Redbridge Mountains is also decent once you get closer to 20. Humans generally are the players that are supposed to go to Westfall. You're supposed to go to Lochmardan if you are a dwarf or a gnome, and Night Elves generally are supposed to go from Teldrassil to Darkshore. You don't have to, however, follow these, and you can easily change up, especially for dwarves and for gnomes. Getting to Stormwind requires you to do a very, very simple process. So Westfall, pretty simple. Your best bet is going to be some of the People's Militia quest lines, the Coastal Menace quest lines, the Captain Grayson quest lines. These ones will net you some pretty cool items, and you'll see on the screen obviously the quests that you may want to keep an eye out for. The big thing here is you have the Dead Mines, okay, which is very, very important, and this is actually a dungeon that you can actually do. So Dead Mines is actually a farmable dungeon from 15 to 25, and is a very, very, very solid route for you as a player. Lochmardan is where you might consider going if you are a dwarf or a gnome. You don't have to level here, as I mentioned. You can go from your Don Moreau to Westfall. Here you have a couple quests, mainly some wanted ones. So Wanted Choksul, In Defense of the King's Land, A Dark Threat Looms, A Hunter's Challenge, and Filthy Paws. These are all significant quests that will drop you some decent loot. So definitely something that you should consider looking at. But again, here there isn't really a dungeon. So this one is more of a straight questing area. Not as nice as Westfall because of some of the density and the mapping, but not too bad an option, especially if you don't feel like adding on the travel time. On the Kalimdor side of things, obviously we have Darkshore. Darkshore being a optimal route if you are someone who is coming from the Night Elf area, especially since the travel time to get to the other Alliance areas probably isn't too great for you. The notable quest here, the Tower of Athalax, supplies to Orbadine, the Fragments Within, Wanted Murkdeep, and Bashalran. These all give you some pretty good green items, so you may want to grab them. The big thing here is there's also no dungeon, so it's realistically not a super duper crucial great area for farming when you compare it to, like, for example, Westfall. As you get closer to your level 20 zone, you may want to move from Westfall and from your like Elwyn Forest type area and move across to Lakeshire Red Ridge Mountains. So Red Ridge Mountains is one of the better zones to obviously level in. I think for most players it's really quite solid, especially when you get near to level 20. Of course, there is some level of PvP, but realistically speaking, you should be fine, I think, especially right now when PvP is not fully enabled, I believe, on the Classic servers, or the Classic Fresh server, I should say. So you have Underbelly Scales, Everstill Bridge, and Dry Time. There's no dungeons yet, but it's a good alternative to leveling for characters. The 20 to 30 range is a little bit different. So there's quite a few different zones that you can go, depending on how you feel. There's Hillsborough at Footlands, and there is Ashenvale. There is the Wetlands and Duskwood. There is the Stone Talon Mountains. And there's also, of course, Ashenvale, which is obviously closer to where the Night Elves are on the Eastern Kingdom side. The thing is, with all of these, realistically speaking, you're going to probably start tackling these in your lower 20s and then pushing through to kind of like your higher kind of range of like 30s. So this is Ashenvale, great place to start for obviously Night Elves. You've got Insane Druids, Unanswered Questions, Rayna's Cleansing, and Mage Summoner. You also have Black Fathom Deeps, which is an absolutely amazing dungeon that you can partake in, and I think it is really, really good, which I think is actually incredibly solid. If you don't feel like that, you can of course push on to maybe looking at, for example, Stone Talon Peaks. So you can go down to Stone Talon Peaks further on, so down from Ashenvale down to Stone Talon Peaks. This is a bit better for 15 to 25. However, it's quite difficult a terrain to kind of handle. So although it's a slightly more dense area, it is a little bit harder to handle, so I would maybe refrain from doing so, just at least in my end. On the Eastern Kingdom side, there's the Wetlands. So the Wetlands is fine for 20 to 30 if you're that way. It's generally speaking where you're going to go if you are a like gnome or dwarf. So you can, generally speaking, go there. Return the Statuette, Uncovering the Past, Defeat Nakrosh, Cleansing the Eye are all pretty good quests here. Generally speaking, what I would say, it is a little bit more challenging to do the Wetlands because of how it's laid out. So for me personally, it's not my favorite area to kind of level through. Instead, what I prefer is Darkshire Duskwood. I think it's just better. It's just a lot easier. I think it's much more simpler to kind of navigate. And I think personally for me, it's just a bit smoother. Nightwatch, Pride of the Embalmer, and Look to the Stars are generally speaking really solid in terms of, like, you know, how can I say, like questing. And then finally we have the Hillsbred Footlands, which generally speaking, I think most players, don't necessarily struggle with too much. But I think ultimately the Hillsbred Footlands is, at least for me, like an okay-ish option. I think it's not too bad. It's just not like my absolute favorite. It's, maybe the heebie-jeebies from back in the day when it was like very, very, very PvP orientated. Be a little bit aware of the hostile mobs and the Yeti cave that, basically is in the center of the zone. So yeah. Level 30 to 40 also has quite a few different areas. Basically, to be honest with you, it's generally speaking also one of those ones that's going to depend on your server or situation. If you're PvPing, some are worse than others. If you are PvEing or on PvE centric servers, then things are a little bit better. Stranglethorn Vale is going to be one of your major ones, especially when it comes to, Eastern Kingdom side of things. Stranglethorn Vale is definitely a really, really, really compact zone, so it's an easy zone to kind of run through. The mobs are very dense, and there's a ton of high quality quests here. Hostile Takeover, Tiger Mastery, Excelsior, Panther Mastery, Green Hills of Stranglethorn, Bad Medicine, Report to Dorian. But the issue is here, PvP runs rife, so to say. So obviously if you're not on a PvP server, it's not a huge issue, but if you flag for PvP or not, then this is a very hotly contested zone because of Booty Bay. So yeah, keep an eye out. On the Kalimdor side of things, obviously continuing the trend for our good friends the Night Elves, who are kind of here battling on their own. 1,000 Needles is going to be your next best place to go, just below Duskwater Marsh. So 1,000 Needles is over here. You'll probably transition there from Stranglethorn or Stone Talons. 1,000 Needles is pretty decent, good for that level 25 to 35 range. Of course, you can pass through the Desolus, which is going to be also relatively decent for you as well, and that's level 30 to 40 zone. So the Desolus, Clanbait, Bone Collector, Centaur Bounty, Return to Valara. The Meridian is there, which is a dungeon, but it's more for scale 42 to 52. So I wouldn't really look at that in terms of 1,000 Needles. There isn't really a dungeon there, so there's nothing really to worry about. And it's a very compact zone, but still really, really good for questing. So I would go 1,000 Needles, then go into the Desolus, generally speaking. The final Eastern Kingdom zone is Duskwater Marsh. So Duskwater Marsh is here, just above 1,000 Needles. Also a good alternative to kind of boost from that 30 to 40 zone. So after you finish 1,000 Needles, after you've gone Desolus, generally speaking, you might want to go to Duskwater Marsh to kind of push on through to that level 40. And yeah, then here you're, generally speaking, a little bit of terrain issues navigating can be some problems. Feast of the Blue Recluse, Hungry, High Perch Venom, and Your All Needs a Blade are all notable quests here, but it's relatively straightforward and simple. On the Eastern Kingdom side of things, you would probably want to finish up with the Arathi Highlands. So the Arathi Highlands, relatively pretty good. As I mentioned, you've got Stranglethorn, you've got the Arathi Highlands. Probably what you want to do is maybe consider doing Arathi Highlands if you're a dwarf character, and then pushing down the Stranglethorn. But generally speaking, I would say Arathi Highlands is a little bit easier to navigate than probably Stranglethorn is. You've got Stromguard Badges, Maiden's Request, Sunken Treasure, Wanted Otto, and Falcon Crest. So I think those are probably a bit better off for you overall in terms of quests. So now we're going to talk about level 40 to 50. There again are quite a few zones to choose from. Generally speaking, Feralis, Stranglethorn kind of get you to that mid 40s range. You'll be in Stranglethorn from that like 30s range. Although Badlands, Swamp of Sorrows, Tanaris are also really good solutions. Hinterlands is pretty solid. Searing Gorge is a really good option. Blasted Lands, Ungoro Crater, generally speaking, are also really good. And Ajara. Generally, what I would say is what you want to do is you want to obviously finish up in Stranglethorn where you have been, and then probably push into some of the other areas. So maybe Badlands, maybe Swamp of Sorrows, and on the like on the Kalimdor side of things, maybe what you want to do is you're going to want to push from, like, for example, the like Duskwater Marsh kind of Thousand Needles, Desolus into your Feralis, and then eventually into your Ungoro Crater type of situation, which I think is where most players will probably want to go. But yeah, you can also obviously go into your generally speaking, that's where I would probably sit, at least from my perspective. But yeah, so let's talk through the zones. On the Eastern Kingdom side, obviously we have the Badlands. So the Badlands is, generally speaking, not too bad, so to say. The Badlands, for me, is something that's not terrible to navigate, not anything too wild. Generally, you'll be here from 35 to 45. There's some really good quests here. There is also Alderman, the dungeon. This one you actually can run. It's located here. This one you can actually run at your level if you are able to find a team. And this is going to be hard. Tremors of the Earth are your major questing areas here. Obviously, that's provided we're talking about obviously Stranglethorn Valley again, which I think most players will obviously be like familiar with. So you go down from here into Stranglethorn Valley, or Stranglethorn Vale, I should say. And Stranglethorn Vale obviously continues being an excellent leveling zone for pretty much everyone. Facing Negalash, Raptor Mastery, Sansal's Secret, Cracking Maori's Foot, and the Captain's Chest is really good. So yeah, definitely would suggest it. On the Kalimdor side of things, we already mentioned kind of the routing. Tanaris is an okay option. It is a very easy place to navigate. There's Deliver to McKinley, South Sea Shakedown, Rescue OOX, Gazradan, the Dunmore Compound, Toga's Quest. You also have Zul'Farrak, the dungeon, which is good from level 46 to 56, so not really for this. But Tanaris is just more like a solid-ish zone to go to kind of boost from that 40 range if you want to generally just kind of do it all in one zone. It's not a bad option. The Hinterlands is something you can find in the Northeast Kingdom here. Most of the quests here are relatively straightforward. Saving Sharpbeak, Rescue OOX is relatively good here, so it's not such a bad option, I think, at least. Feralis on the Kalimdor side of things is a very good option. Fuel for the Zapping, Zap Giants, Becoming Apparent, The Mark of Quality, Hero's Welcome, Wandering Share. You also have the Diamond Dungeon, which can carry you from level 45 to 55, so that's something that's really helpful overall, and is not a bad option in the slightest. And then finally, we talk about the Searing Gorge. So the Searing Gorge can obviously be located down in good old, again, can be located down in good old Eastern Kingdoms. Searing Gorge is pretty good from around level 43 to 50. Generally speaking, I'd say it's got some good quests. Ice and Doors, Rise Obsidian, tell them, set them ablaze, curse these fat fingers, and wanted Overseer Motoris is all pretty good, decent stuff for characters to level through. Finally, let's talk about the level 50 to 60 range. So obviously, you may want to look at things like Blasted Lands, Ungoro Crater, Fellwood, Western Plague Lands. Basically, the mid-50s, you're looking at Eastern Plague Lands and Winterspring. And then obviously, Syphilis becomes an option if Phase 5 is completed. Ajara is decent, but aside from the Hydraxian Warlord quests, it's not really a reason I would say you want to go there. So I think rather focus on things like Blasted Lands, etc. But yeah, so obviously starting off with Blasted Lands, this is continuing the Eastern Kingdom side of things, which is obviously great. So here you can see like the Eastern Kingdoms, and I think, you know, this is good for like level 47 to 50. Everything counts in large amounts to serve Kamisha and Blood Mage Draziel, which offers some pretty decent quest lines as well, which I think is pretty solid. So yeah. Then we have the Ungoro Crater, which obviously we can continue questing in up until around level 55. It's dangerous to go alone. Shizzle's Flyer, the bait for Lakori, a little help from my friends, and beware of the Pterodactyls, or relatively solid quests. There's no dungeon here, but again, you can just continue here. You might be leveling in here already, so it's more than fine, realistically. Then we have Ajara. I don't really recommend leveling here, to be honest with you. It's just not really something that I would suggest. So I would just skip it, really, and rather focus on something like Fellwood, which I think maybe players will have a bit of a better time with. I think Fellwood is just a bit better. It's just got better density, level 48 to 55, Ruincloth, Deadwood of the North, Timbermore Ally, and Who Remains of Trey Lightforge are all really good notable quest rewards that you can farm here. And then obviously from there you can kind of go into Winterspring to finish up 55 to 60, and you can look at things like Shire Rutam, the Crystals in Malor, and the Wild Kin of Aloon, which are pretty noticeable quests that you may want to do, which is all really good. The Burning Steps is also somewhere where you can clean up on the Eastern Kingdom side. Here obviously is level 50 to 59, pretty good density, not a lot of notable quests that just give items. In fact, I don't think there's any, but yeah, just a decent, relatively solid questing zone. So yeah. Then you have the Western Plague Lands, so that's a little bit up here. So you have the Eastern Plague Lands and the Western Plague Lands. So this is also pretty good. You have some notable quests here: In Dreams, The Last Barov, and Mission Accomplished. There's also Scholarmance, which is a dungeon that features level 55 to 60, but basically there's a lot of overlap for PvP and stuff, which is always going to be a bit of a problem. At the same time, of course, you can also talk about Eastern Plague Lands, which is obviously relatively solid. The Scarlet Oracle, the Corpulent One, When Smokey Sings, I Get Violent in the Battle of Darrowshire. Stratholme also is a decent dungeon, but this is mainly better for like level 58, essentially, and yeah, just something that's pretty intense, so to say. So dungeons are a relatively solid grind. I'm not going to talk too much about dungeons as an option, but I'll just basically give you a listing here. So for Alliance, it's Deadmine, Stockade, then Scarlet Monastery, then Zul'Farrak, Blackrock Depths, and then Lower Blackrock Spire. You have to head to dungeons physically, so you can't queue for them through looking for group. You can find a group through looking for group, but you can't queue for them. You can't automatically jump to them. You have to still be in their region. Now, dungeons are great. They drop loot. They give good EXP, but it's just going to depend a lot on you having an incredibly good, strong, powerful team, and an efficient team, and one that's really willing to kind of run and grind. If you are, they can be great, but that's really all I can say. You can follow the guide on them if you want to. If you've got 4 friends and you're willing to dungeon grind, then, you know, awesome, that's the best way to go. The last couple of things I can mention are obviously just some tips that you may want to consider. Of course, I'm really not going to be able to, like, I think, explain to you all the intricacies here, because the thing is, a lot of it is something that's really straightforward. A great example is, for example, making food, making drink, and potions. Okay, potions is something you pick up. It's super important, that way you do get these items. Another really important thing is food, drink, especially if you're a mage or a mana user. Food and drink are super duper important. You need them, you're going to need them in between fights. Being able to make your own, even super simple ones with things like cooking, is absolutely paramount. The same with first aid, making your bandages, being able to give yourself bandages, being able to give yourself a way to heal mid-combat can save your life, and especially if you're out of potions, it's the next best alternative. And realistically, I really do suggest that you look into it. Of course, on top of that, keeping up to date with your trainers is absolutely vital, from ranking up your skills to also doing your class quests. Doing your class quests is also very important and incredibly helpful. On top of that as well, you're going to want to consider your build. It is incredibly important, which is also really, really helpful. And weapon skills. So your character won't be able to use every weapon that they're available to use. Visiting a weapon master can be super helpful, especially if you find certain weapons that are really good. I would consider looking at a weapon master around about the mid 10s to 20s. If you start to find green items that are not necessarily you're able to equip, like, I think that's very important. Then of course, saving for a mount. A mount will cost you about 100 gold, which can be very difficult to get to by level 40. You need to purchase riding skill, which is 20 gold, and a mount, which is 80 gold. Basically, there's not a lot else that you can do except for maybe harvesting minerals and items and selling those. I think that's something that's very, very important. Taking consumables and things like sharpened whetstones or tonics or potions, or using scrolls when you have them, is all highly recommended, and I suggest you do that pretty much as often as you can. I think it's very, very important. And of course, bag space, whether it's through yourself or through the auction house or through a friend, bags are going to be helpful. It prevents how many times you have to stop at the vendor. It allows you to just keep moving, and it's always super duper important. On top of that as well, you're going to want to make sure that whenever you are logging out, you log out in the rest area. This is basically going to give you this little ZZZZZ icon here, and this is super important because it gives you rested XP, which you realistically want, especially if you're not going to be playing the game for a while, or you are going to be, coming back after a while. Then finally, last to mention is professions. So professions are super important, more so than they ever are in retail, really. Well, I don't want to say ever, but they are very important. And the reason for this is actually pretty straightforward. This is a situation where you can actually make things that are useful for your character. For example, I can make rough whetstones, I can make sharpening whetstones, I can even make myself copper boots and pants that generally are quite competitive with what I'm wearing at the time. And as long as you keep this up to date, generally speaking, it's a great way to fill up, especially on gear slots that you may not be able to fill out, or on consumables that you may need. Tailoring is great for bags, etc., which is all really, really helpful. So it's stuff that's just super duper important and highly, highly suggested. And then finally, last but not least, classic leveling is not a quick experience. Classic leveling is a long experience. Just to get to level 10, it's taken me 5 hours, 2 minutes, and 17 seconds. Obviously, some of that has been filming this video and also generally filming other videos or doing things. But the point is that it's a long experience. Getting to level 10, generally for a first-time player that's following a guide or something like that, will take them probably nigh on 3 hours or so. to 3.5, and it's just an experience that's a lot slower than retail WoW. So don't rush it, don't panic, enjoy yourself, and you should be good to go. But that's it. That is pretty much everything you need to know. That should cover everything you guys need from this and pretty much everything else for Alliance characters. If you need more assistance, you can let me know. But yeah, hopefully this has given you guys a really good idea on what to do in terms of leveling your Alliance characters in Classic WoW. That's it from me. Bye.